First of all, do you want to hear about our project or are
Yeah, if you could please introduce yourselves
Mhm,
and tell me what your project's all about.
So my name is Peter Dunnett
And I'm Tendai Ball. Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to
Mhm.
meet you guys.
and you want to tell them about the project, Tender?
So our project
premise.
started.
Mhm.
Should we start
At the
sophomore
beginning,
year? Okay.
yes.
Our project started because our school in Washington, D.C. Offers travel fellowships. The premise is basically there are multiple fellowships in which you can sort of apply to. You submit a proposal, and then out of the group of people who submit proposals, only a certain few are selected, and they're given the funding to sort of go to the place that they want to do research in. And it's a really cool idea and process. So Peter and I were always interested in doing a fellowship together since sophomore year. So in sophomore year, we submitted a fellowship to go to Japan to research overfishing and sort of hydroponics and stuff that can be done there to sort of like in both green energy and also to reduce like overfishing in Japan. And then we didn't get that fellowship because of Corona. We didn't get the opportunity because of COVID. And then this year, we thought that if we have the opportunity this summer, if things open up again, we should really start doing another fellowship. And Peter had this amazing journey in which he decided that we were going to do solar for this year.
And of course, it had to do with the local hydroponics farm. They didn't get enough power draw. One of the main problems with opening it up and restarting the site after COVID was that they only got provided a certain amount of power, and I guess the hardware wasn't there. And you think that in DC, what would be the most efficient and I guess renewable way to harness energy, but outside of the grid? That's also very well incentivized by the government. In fact, what we learned, funnily enough, is that uh, 4/5 of all the revenue of all the profits of going solar in DC come from these incentives, not from the actual power savings, which is pretty impressive. And we thought, why not? But we didn't know anything about solar at the time, and then that was my idea behind researching solar. And eventually, we did apply for a fellowship. We noticed that there were some uh, I guess trends and boundaries forming along the solarization in DC, especially having to do with underserved communities, of course, and a lot of it just slowed down by government regulations, despite these incentives, and oftentimes outdated infrastructure systems. And we were going to do a project where we would go and research the southwest, which is considered the most solar friendly region in the US, and is seen as kind of the pioneers of solar in the country, and see perhaps if there are any similarities, differences, and what our local DC community can learn from that. And well, what happened next then there?
So we started researching like experts in the area. We got to talk to people like Mr. Jesse Walensky, who's the CEO of, who's affiliated with a company in DC. We got to talk to some people in the Southwest. And honestly, like from that moment until now, we've learned so much. And we learned a lot about the industry, learned about a lot about the market, and how it's way different than the idea that a lot of people have going into it. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna buy solar. I'm just gonna go solar. I'm gonna get panels and I'm gonna help save the world. But it's a lot more complicated than that. And honestly, I feel like one of the biggest differences between how people treat solar versus how they need to treat solar is they don't really treat solar like an actual established business. They don't really understand that the production, the installation, the warranties, all the things that go into it are very similar to what goes into, or almost the same as what goes into a lot of actual other businesses, for example, like cars. they just assumed that, as like I just assumed that it was just like, oh, we buy panels, the panels come in, and then you know, we save energy, we save power, we save everybody. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
And we
Very
also
good.
talked to a lot of installers, etc., and the challenges they face. For example, well, even yesterday we were in Las Vegas, and and we had a whole tour of the solar facilities. I don't know if you know them. They're installers in Southern Nevada, major ones, and they showed us they recently had an ad campaign with Steve Aoki, who's from the area, to kind of try to popularize solar in the region, and told us how that worked out. We also got to see one of their installations, but we were wondering if we could get your perspective as a manufacturer of solar, and I guess your business story and how you got into this market and the trends you noticed as you progressed.
Okay, sure. Well, that's very good, guys. Very nice background. I understand how how the road led you to here, potentially a trip to Japan, and now about renewable energy. So, um, Peter and Tom. Tom is your
Tendai,
name?
Tndai, Tendai.
Okay, hang on. Let me look it up. Make sure I pronounce it properly. Oh, Tendai. Okay. So Peter and Tendai. Good job, guys. So you are right, Tendai, that solar is not a young, it's not a small business anymore. It's still a young industry that's growing double digits every year. However, the pricing is at commodity levels already. Even though it's fairly young, it's growing double digits, but it's by no means a small industry. And it's not a simple industry. There are, as you pointed out, there are a lot of complexities with it. You've got, you think about just last year in the US, 20 gigawatts were installed. It's the fastest growing industry. It's the fastest growing segment of the renewable sector. And now with President Biden's directive and intention to be fully reliant on renewable energies, and solar being a key renewable energy, there are several renewable energy sectors. Solar is increasingly more important. Now, from the financial side, there's one aspect of it. It's you're paying for all of your electricity upfront, if you will. So if you have a utility, you have your traditional electric bill, you use the electricity and you pay as you go. If you're going to own a solar system, you're a resident or you're a small commercial business, and you pay for that whole system, you're in essence paying for all that electricity up front. And then you're going to break even anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and thereafter it's free electricity. So that's why the quality of the panel, the warranty that can be counted on is vital, right? So it's a very interesting business. It's very complex. So because you're paying for this electricity upfront, it's the entire thing, right? Where are the solar panels coming from? Where are the components for the solar panel coming from? Who is manufacturing the solar panel? Who is installing the solar panel? And the solar panel by itself, it generates DC electricity, whereby most of our appliances use AC. So then that has to be converted from DC to AC. What is that's called the inverter, and where's the inverter coming from? What's the warranty on the inverter? Has it been hooked up properly? And then if the amount of solar you have, the other complication is solar is only generating its power during the day. It's solar, it has to have sunlight. So, but we have the need for electricity at night. So how is that going to work? Am I going to take excess energy and store it and then use it at night? That's coming. It's getting more and more popular. Then you get completely off the grid. But today, what we do is we treat the grid as a storage, where if you have excess power, you pump it back to the grid, somebody else uses it. The traditional sources of grid aren't going to feed the grid as much. So it's a virtual battery. And then at nighttime, you pull from the grid. So that means your solar system is connected to the grid. Then what about the safety concerns? The grid goes down, the sun is still up, solar is still generating power, it can be feeding back into the grid. Yeah, we have to make sure the systems are designed properly to have a shutdown where the solar is disconnected from the grid. But then you can have the argument, okay, but I'm generating power and I'm wasting it. What do I do at that point, right? So very complex, but also very exciting and very interesting. A lot of innovation possible. Now, from a manufacturing standpoint, I'm glad you found out about Auxin Solar. This is wonderful. We're one of the few remaining US manufacturers. In fact, we're probably the only true US manufacturer that's headquartered in the US, manufacturing in the US. We have no foreign parent. We have no manufacturing outside of the US because we have an additional agenda here at Auxin Solar, which is to create and sustain good paying American manufacturing jobs, and we want to grow that. Very glad you found us. So from a manufacturing perspective, the things that are very important to us obviously are the quality. People are making a pretty healthy investment when they go solar. So we have a responsibility on the quality and to stand by our warranty. We're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. We can't run and hide, shut down the company. It just doesn't work that way in America. So that part is very important. But at the same time, we have to have a sustainable business model where we can stay alive and continue to create jobs, maintain the jobs we have created and create more jobs. And to that end, we have to be very efficient in how we operate so that we can compete against our foreign competition. They have a lot lower OPEX, obviously, because the wage rates are a lot lower in other countries. However, so why does it work for us? One of the reasons it works is the bill of materials dominates the cost of making a solar panel. The level of automation, there's always more automation you can do. But as you automate more, the component of what we would call the OPEX, which is the people, the building, the utility cost, that becomes a smaller percentage of the overall cost. So then you can make the argument that, okay, let's say in the US it's 2x more, so what? It's only 5% of the overall cost. Just throwing out some numbers there, and then you can say, well, that cancels out the cost of shipping and there's a value you can put to time, right? We can make a panel here. We're on the West Coast, and it can be shipped across the country, a truckload within a week versus several weeks on the ocean coming from Asia or where have you. So that part is important. At the same time, government policy is supremely important because to keep it a level playing field where panels may come subsidized from other governments. So we have to compete against that. So it's a challenging business to be in. Manufacturing a commodity product already is a challenge, no matter where you are. But manufacturing a commodity product in America, in Silicon Valley, is that much more challenging. So whatever is on our control, we will do, which is being very process oriented, keeping our yields very high. So we want to limit our losses and essentially an efficient operation and great customer service. That's what's at our disposal, right? So that's my perspective on the solar industry. So you can ask me more targeted questions and I can address those.
Yeah, for sure. Well, from your standpoint, though, I mean, there definitely is a reason that basically everyone switched to producing in China or in Asia, right? And of course, it's really tough to compete. So, what strategies have you used specifically, or to stay alive, or what selling points?
Right. So there are different types of panels, right? There's your run-of-the-mill standard panels that go on people's houses, that go on commercial systems or go into utilities. There are three segments in the solar industry. There's the residential, there's the commercial, and there's the utility. So the residential, commercial are roughly half of the entire business. And then there's the utility. So the volume is higher on the utility, prices are lower. The volume is lower on the residential, prices are higher. So we don't sell directly, obviously. We're a manufacturer. We sell to other manufacturers. We white label their panels because they want a made in USA version of their panel, and we sell to installers. They are the pricing at the residential level is higher, so we can compete, and there'll be a certain niche market out there that is looking for a made in US, they're willing to pay a little bit higher. And also there's custom panels. So there's the standard run of the mill for residential commercial utility. It's 60 cell, 72 cell products. But there's also a lot of custom designs out there, and we manufacture a lot of custom panels. So we balance it out by having part of our production dedicated to standard panels, which are very, very aggressively priced, and part of our production on the custom panels. So that's how we've been able to survive. And also along the way, the US government has stepped in a few times to stop dumping, right? As you guys do your research, you're going to learn about the anti-dumping duties that were put in place back in the early 2010s. I don't remember the exact year. And then there were countervailing duties put in place because there was circumvention on those anti-dumping. And then that was followed up again with further tariffs in 2015, 2016. Even that wasn't enough, because slowly, as you do your research, you'll find all of the manufacturing has been gutted in the US, the entire supply chain. So then in 2018, Section 201 tariffs were put in place, and we are coming up on the expiration in 2022. It was a 4-year term, and we will see if that can be extended. So the government has come in, stepped in every once in a while to help out. We would not be here today if those tariffs were not put in place to keep things fair, but that's still not enough. So we need to incentivize manufacturing in the US on the upstream. We also need to incentivize the use of American-made panels downstream. We need to close some loopholes that are there. For example, military projects that should be using American-made because it's tax dollars, but there are loopholes there. And the federal government, they have a lot on their plate. But when it comes to, they find out about these things going on in the business, and we point it out, they do something about it. So that's been very, very critical.
Along with government incentives, is there anything that's sort of critical to the long term of production and manufacturing in America for you guys?
Yeah, multiple things there. So first of all, yeah, we need long-term policies that reward the use of American-made products. You need policies where you're not siphoning tax dollars overseas. It just doesn't make sense. And fundamentally, you should produce what you consume long-term, just for society to sustain itself. Very specific to solar, though, definitely you need those policies that require made in USA for tax funded projects. But not only that, you need policies that help us compete better against other governments subsidizing their exports. Okay, there's that piece. Then the other piece is, if you go 100% renewable energy dependent, and you say, okay, it's good for the environment, it's good for global warming, we must use renewable energies, great. And you decide to go that route, and the lion's share of that is a solar panel. From a national security perspective, you better have the production within the United States, not only of the solar panel, but the entire supply chain for the solar panel. Because think about it this way: you've gone green, and you're reliant on your equipment to generate power as the solar panel. but you don't have control over the production. You don't have control over the supply chain of the production of the solar panel. It's a huge national security risk. So that's why for the long term, it's important to have policies to support the downstream consumption of solar panels, but also have policies that encourage the upstream and rewards the upstream production of the solar panel supply chain.
Mhm. And what is the importance of federal versus local government in this? And to what extent would you say each could contribute? And what would you say each could change in their approach currently?
I think since this is a lot of this is related to trade, that again, I'm not a political science expert by any means, but if it's related to foreign trade and dealing with unfair foreign trade, the federal government needs to do something about it because it affects the entire country. As far as what the local and state governments can do is that's a part of the job creation, right? I've got a factory here in Silicon Valley. I'll be opening other factories uh, soon, hopefully, with the right business climate. And when I open those factories, where would I create the job? So, that's where the local and state governments can come in and try to encourage me to come to their community and open a factory in their community. That's where they can help. There used to be state and local incentives before, rebates before, to encourage the adoption of solar. Financially, it's not necessary anymore. So let a free market reign on that, because if you it's yes, it would be great for us to have those rebates. It'll increase the market size, but it's not necessary, because I don't know if you guys have done the research on this. Solar has pretty much hit grid parity in most of the markets, maybe in all the states. I don't know that. But once you've hit grid parity, it can stand on its own, and it's more healthy for it to stand on its own without the need for that type of government support subsidies. Right?
I see what you mean. And as a manufacturer, I'm sure you notice many trends in different installers you sell to. So from the perspective, of these years, how has the solar market evolved from I guess, from your client's perspective? To who have you started selling more to? Who have you started selling less to? What has been sold more? Both in terms of
Uh,
players and the technology.
And also, what have you noticed that businesses tend to value more about what you offer?
Unfortunately, it's a commodity market. It's and very unfortunate. It's a race to the bottom. So the installers have just pretty much gravitated towards the most cost-effective panels they can find on the market.
Mhm.
I don't fault them, because they have a business to keep alive. If they don't do that, their competitors are going to do it, and they're going to get the bid. So the trend in for the last decade, so we've been at it for 12 years. What I've noticed in the last decade is, because it's become a commodity, people have gravitated away from the quality they would get because it's an American made, or the warranty support that's likely to be around because it's American made. They have made the choice to go where they'll get the lowest cost panel. So that's been the trend in the last 10 years. However, there's also another trend whereby there have been enough people who have been burned by the low quality products coming from certain other regions of the world. And we had lost those customers back in 2012, 2013. They, for 2, 3 years, they installed the foreign products. Then they experienced the warranty issues and the quality issues. And then they came back full circle and back to us. So we've seen that trend. Another trend we've noticed is, as I was mentioning earlier, there is a niche market there who are willing to pay a slight premium, but supporting American made.
Mhm.
right? So there are customers who are fishing those type of markets out, and we're supplying to those customers. So we're seeing an uptick of that. So, but overall, though, it's for the last 10 years, the trend has been pretty much losing customer base and volume.
In terms of the actual, I guess makeup of the different uh, players that you sell to, has it been centralizing or decentralizing? Like, what trends have you noticed in the actual profile of each installer?
Um, I think it's more for us for the market. It's more of the one-offs, the local installers
Mhm.
here and there. It may be in California, it may be in Mississippi or some other place, but it's the smaller installers, the one-offs, not the large installers, not the large distributors, because their game is volume and low cost. So that's what I've seen. And for Auxin Solar in particular, our market was mostly overseas. Our market was in Europe,
Mhm.
in Australia. We had branches in Australia. We had branches in Europe. We had a design center in Germany when the U.S. market. So it was very strange. First, we had a U.S. market. Then we had to exit, and we had foreign markets. That's where we were selling to. Then the foreign competitors, non-American competitors, came into those markets, and we got driven out of I cannot remember now. We exited Australia first, I believe. Then we exited Europe altogether. Then we came back full circle to the US because by now people had learned and there was some demand for the US. Now we're looking at foreign markets again because it's come full circle in foreign markets, rejecting the low quality products or lack of warranty support. So maybe we will see what the mix is. But right now we went from 0% in the US and 100% abroad to 100% in the US, 0% abroad, and we'll see it's going to start mixing up again. But as far as the trend on the customer base, our custom customers, that's remained the same. No change there. But for the generic panels, it's usually to the dedicated installers that are looking for American made.
If you had to make a prediction about how business is going to change in the coming future, would you say that, for example, that your business is beginning to shift overseas again, or that you would notice that your customers are beginning to shift to markets, or I mean to production overseas, or that maybe you're going to be able to have more customers coming in and relying on your higher quality panels, or your higher quality production, and trying, how would you say that business is going to shift?
Yeah. So on the second point, our customers have already eroded and gravitated towards the lower cost panels, but I see them all, not all, but I see a lot of it coming back because I'm very encouraged by what's happening in Washington, D.C. and some of the policies that are going to be coming out shortly. So I'm looking forward to the future. I definitely see a big uptick in the U.S. customer base, even in the high volume, lower price market. Okay, I'm very, very positive about this. As far as exports, I also see exports going up. What the ratio will be, that's to be determined right now. We are testing out some overseas markets, but I definitely see an opportunity also to export U.S. made products overseas to certain markets that have been burnt, if you will, by low quality products. And they have actually reached out to us, fished us out as one of the true American manufacturers and said, we want an American made product. So I'm very encouraged by that. But yeah, going forward, I see it positive in both directions. I'm in fact very excited about what's coming.
So, since the markets have seen a shift to, and as we have seen from, as we have learned from others, not only not only foreign production, but also even foreign design and I guess yeah, foreign engineering. Do you see that trend continuing, and do you see yourself as yeah continuing to keep the stand as the lone producer, so to speak, or do you see more people reconsidering and starting to come back in that field?
I certainly hope it comes back, right? So one of the things is, remember, solar was invented in America. It was
Mm-hmm.
in, and a lot of the innovations that have increased the efficiencies of solar panels, that have increased the safety of solar panels, a lot of that innovation happened in America and also in Germany and Europe and Japan. But we have lost that innovation because the business model doesn't work, right? Well, how are you going to innovate if you don't have a business to run that can pay its bills? So I certainly hope, and I'm optimistic, that that innovation is going to come back as we have policies that encourage and reward and level the playing field for manufacturing in the US. That needs to happen first. So we need to reestablish the American manufacturing of not only solar modules, but the entire supply chain for solar. That's once that's established, the baseline is established, that will then create the opportunity for research and development for the next stage and the next generation of solar products. And once that's established, I believe the R&D is going to come back. There's already R&D going on. However, it's been very difficult for these smart people to raise the funding to convince investors to invest because the ROI wasn't there or it was very risky. But once it comes back here and the baseline is established, I believe the investor confidence will return, and they will be able to fund some of these R&D that's happening.
And would you say government has to drive that baseline to return again, or is it someone else's?
Yes,
Yes.
it's going to be with the government policies. Unfortunately, you're going to need government policies to level the playing field and also to essentially give the proper reward for downstream customers using a US made product and upstream to incentivize the investments that are required and also to level the playing field, as I was saying earlier. So yes, absolutely, the government is going to be required for this to come back.
Yeah. Sorry. If this baseline were to return, what would you see? What role do you think that these overseas markets would have to play in, I guess, the U.S. supply chain? Do you think that the production would sort of like fade off over time, or would they still kind of would we still rely on them? We would just rely on American manufacturers more.
I'll have to, you should try to do some research on this paper that was published by an MIT professor back, I think it was 2007 or 2008. In fact, it was that paper that convinced me that manufacturing in the US is going to work or made sense. And the premise of that is the bill of materials is going to dominate the cost of the panel. So you should make it where you're going to consume. So that means you don't need to have one part of the world being the world supplier for solar. So we would have manufacturing, the supply chain, upstream supply chain, and the final product of the solar module. You'd have you can say the Americas region, North America, South America's region. You could have European, you could have North African, South African regions, you could have Asian regions. So just because you increase supply chain manufacturing in the US, it doesn't mean it needs to go away somewhere else. The pie is large enough and it should be distributed. So there will be production everywhere regionally to service sections of the world. So I don't think they need to go away. We can all coexist.
So it's kind of funny because right now I guess solar production is looking like the 19th century DC electricity grid, very
Mm.
centralized in one spot, but at the same time there's a lot of communication and long distance just getting that energy from one place to the other, and that's the reason people are
Mm.
getting the incentives to decentralize, which is of course what you're pushing for in the solar market.
Well, this is why I got into it to begin with. Solar to me was positively had the potential to be positively disruptive to existing methods of electricity generation distribution, just as the cell phone was, right? So you had the Western world had a telephone network that was built over 100 years. Developing countries do not have the resources to build that infrastructure. They would never have it until the invention or whatever you want to call it of cell phones and cell towers. So now you put a cell tower in the middle of a village in India or
Mhm.
in South America, and then a 10-mile radius is service, right? So that's what was exciting to me about solar, is the same way in the Western world we have built this grid that's 100. We've been building it for 100 years and we're maintaining it, and it's somewhat outdated. Developing countries just don't have the resources to build such a grid, and it would take them a very long time if they could do it. But with solar, you have the power exactly where you need it. So you can do a local distribution. So it's actually a good thing that it's gone backward and it's DC, and you can have locally generated. And now with the cost of battery storage getting lower and lower and the densities increasing, you can see a future where you could be completely off the grid and just have you generate your own power, you store it, and then you use it at night. So yes, you're right. It almost looks like it's gone backward, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, but even even fully developed countries now, namely DC, are reconsidering their choice, to have built the grid. And of course, I consider that step of building the infrastructure and seeing how it would work in an interconnected way as a necessary step to then uh, figure out how to best optimize, that distribution. And then answer is decentralization, right? And only now are they starting, to come to that conclusion, decentralized energy, which is quite interesting, a completely new approach too,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
It's I went to a country a few months ago, or actually, you know what? It was pre-lockdown,
Hmm.
and they had these large dams that they've built that generate a lot of good hydropower, but they've been at it for 10 years and they still cannot get it distributed to where it's needed. So they've been stuck on that. So they could do that and then come back to the solar decentralization, but they're just saying, you know what, it's too difficult. We won't do it. Let's just decentralize.
Hmm.
Yeah, shifting the focus a little bit, you mentioned that like the systems that can be a little bit outdated. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we've talked to a lot of solar companies, and we actually had one of them who said in an interview that Peter, the quote was, I believe, that solar is almost like it's about a 3 century long issue. Peter, do you remember the quote?
Oh yeah, he said that that basically installing solar in DC was the challenge of connecting a 19th century grid to 21st century technology with 20th century legislation.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was wondering if there are any if that sort of outdatedness is hindering the progress and the development of production as it's the same in the same type of ways that's hindering installation.
No, we're removed from that. We produce the equipment, the solar generation equipment, but I can completely appreciate the gentleman or the lady's response that you're trying to tie in 21st century technology into a 19th century grid, which couldn't foresee this technology coming and connecting. And you also have to understand solar is very stable,
Hmm.
right? It's
Mhm.
dependent on the sun. A little bit of cloud cover comes in, all of a sudden the power generation goes down significantly. So you have to have a grid that's able to handle and react to that appropriately. And but on that front, maybe we're trying to connect in the wrong way to the grid too. All right, so that's a separate topic to be discussed, but that's what I would say. So if I was on that side of the uh, uh, business, I would have instead of trying to connect the 21st century technology to a 19th century technology and struggling with some of the compatibility issues, I would think out of the box and say, okay, what do I need to do in between to make it a simpler connection, right? So, but yeah, we don't get involved on that end, and we're not impacted by that. We're in our happy little manufacturing world, just making the solar panels.
And is there any way you're making that or trying to make that process easier for installers, to, I guess, retrofit them with the right either information or technology to be able to facilitate that process?
We're trying some experiments. We're going to try some new design ideas on systems that we will design and implement. So we're going to develop the entire uh, system for the end users, implementing it with our panels and some other technology. We're going to test it out, do several projects, iron out the kinks. Then we will go to installers with the solution.
I see. So you make sure that it's as compatible, I guess, or as user friendly, so to speak, for install as possible.
To be everything's got to be. You're now entering the consumer space, so everything has to be as plug and play as possible.
Mhm. And is there a way, I guess, since you do work in many regions, that you tailor, those technologies to governmental specifications, because a lot of the problems that installers face are just, often, and solar, in a way, you have to think of it as a construction business. I know these constructions, completely blockages, that exist with solar in these legislations often hamper them. So do you have a tailored approach to certain regions perhaps, or, certain legislatures?
Uh, you No, we're trying to keep it inside the box. We're trying to keep all the complexities, if you will, inside a box, so the outside world doesn't have to
Mhm.
see it, doesn't have to deal with it. So that removes some of those complexities. However, still, whenever you're talking to the grid, you do have those soft costs
Mhm.
and the difficulties that your other interview highlighted. So that will still be there. Mm, but the technical challenges of the two new technology plugging into old technology, that's where we're trying to bring it into a box to simplify. But as far as the connectivity and all the paperwork, the permitting and whatnot that goes along with it, unless you're what you call behind the fence, that will still be there. And that's up to the local, not even the utilities, but the commissions that oversee the utilities on how to streamline those processes and also make it more cost effective for the installers.
Mhm. So I guess just to make sure for the average listener, uh we already in a previous interview explained the average process for an installer. What they do from beginning to end, kind of.
Mm.
And from there we solve those difficulties, because it's not just, boom boom, get the panels, put them in, that's it.
Mhm.
First of all, it's, certified panels, with warranty, seek them out, how to get the right partner, then get the agreement, propose a proper plan, get that plan reviewed by the government, get that plan reviewed by the customer, approve that plan by both, then get the permit to build, then finally install, and then the usage permit, which is just completely absurd in some cases. So yeah, it's just small things like that which pile up. And so how does your process look? From let's say getting the whatever materials to designing new technologies, let's say R&D, to building something, testing, and shipping to source.
Right. We also, it's a very complex process, and not the same steps that the installer needs to do, but we have our own steps to do that have tremendous challenges. In our case, it's really related to supply chain management. We have many different bill of materials for the one product. So, and you can have surprises in many places, whether it's a truck breaking down or a strike at the port of entry, or paperwork not being filed, or some inclement weather that causes a material delay. So everything, so you have product SKUs, you have materials that are meant for one type of product and different combination for another type of product. All the right combination needs to be in-house. You cannot have a bit of one and a bit of another. For example, the glass size versus the frame size versus the type of cell we're using. So you have to manage that supply chain properly to get it here. Then once it's here, then controlling the production flow. There are many steps to taking those raw materials, and at the end of the line, a solar panel comes out. So it's not a one-step process. There are multiple steps involved, and there we have to do proper, for example, preventive maintenance on certain equipment that are critical to the production. You cannot have them down. We do whatever we can that we know of, but sometimes you still get surprised, and all it takes is one equipment down. If there's no redundancy, your line is down. Then you have to have the right personnel to manage the processes. You cannot have excess personnel because then your costs go up. You have to have the right amount, some redundancy, then, but if people are out, that also affects the production line. So there are those variables that we have to navigate. So those are our complexities to getting it out. And then of course, is the actual performance of the panel. We have to, at the end, do the tests. We have inline tests to make sure it's all good. We have to manage the yields based on those inline tests. We have to slow things down. If the yield is going down, understand what's happening, correct it, bring the yields back up. But once the production is down, then we have to measure and make sure our quality checks pass. Those are technical quality checks as well as cosmetic quality checks. You catch something at the end of the line, you spent all that, all the resources to make it, and you lose it. So we have our own set of complexities, completely different from the integration side when you're integrating the panel into a system, but it's also complex on our end.
Yeah, as you explained, this process is very complex, multifaceted, a lot of steps. Have you found that in the past year, on top of that, has COVID affected this process? Has it made it much harder in some ways? Has it made it in some ways maybe easier? Can you please go into that?
And what have you used, to overcome those difficulties?
Yeah,
and what helped? Yeah.
So we put in we're in Santa Clara County in California, so it's very strict over here. So we put in all the COVID protocols. We did have to do some minor shutdowns 2 or 3 times. First time it was mandated by the county. The other 2 times there were, one was somebody actually got the COVID virus here, so we had to shut down, have everybody tested to make sure before we could restart. And another one was this, somebody had an exposure, and so we also shut down, I believe, in that case. So it has affected us in positive and negative ways. On the negative, all the social distancing protocols we had to adhere to, so we had to use less workers. A lot of our customers got impacted because the construction projects were put on hold. So that affected our pipeline, sales pipeline. That was a challenge to deal with. But on the positive side, it allowed us to discover more efficiencies, trying to keep the outputs up while we're doing the social distancing and have less workers. And we had, so it's, and another one was just getting personnel in during the there was a period of the pandemic where stimulus checks were being given out, but we had work. We could be giving paychecks, but the workers decided to stay at home and get the stimulus checks instead. So that was a bit of a challenge. We lost some talent and some trained talent that way. But on the positive side, it forced us to do more with less. So we brought in some efficiencies that as the business picks up, as we go fully post-COVID and the country's back on track, we will utilize some of those efficiencies, not necessarily to reduce workforce, but to produce more with the same workforce. That's always good for the business.
Mm-hmm. And well, speaking of, you are an innovative company, and speaking of, technology and innovation, what technological trends has your, R&D department noticed recently in panels? What have you achieved with them? And perhaps could this new development, perhaps in some way different from the Asian or the Chinese one, uh, has it been used as a selling point for you, and how has that worked?
It's the innovation here is, at least right now, it's on the higher efficiency. We're trying to squeeze out more efficiency from the panels, but innovation is going to be really on how do you keep the quality up but lower the cost, right? And that you do by making the panels more efficiently, making higher volumes. That's really it. As far as some brand new technologies, nothing on the horizon, at least from our manufacturing, our raw materials, our product here per se. There are some customers we're working with, some very interesting ideas that are out there on new technologies that can increase efficiency quite a bit. It's in early stages, but in the immediate future, the innovation I would say is manufacturing innovation, manufacturing process innovation, as opposed to the product. It's innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going to like the manufacturing innovation, have you noticed that, is there any specific area where the innovation takes place? For example, could it take place in the changing of raw materials? Have people like been starting to rely on different raw materials for the production of solar panels, or maybe does it come in the manufacturing of the panels itself? Has there been like more innovation in, I guess, the construction of the panels? And
there is some raw material that is better for the production of the panels. There's some raw materials out there that will make the panel more reliable, but the raw material is slightly more expensive. There are other raw material out there that make the panel slightly more efficient than what's out there. So there's definitely innovation in the raw material that we could utilize in addition to the manufacturing innovation. But again, these are not quantum leaps. These are evolutionary changes. So you have to proceed with caution when you're adopting these changes, because you have to remember it's a commodity product. So there's not necessarily unless you have a revolutionary change. On the evolutionary change, you cannot have a premium that you can ask for. Therefore, the ROI, if it's there, it's going to be not that exciting. Yeah. So there you have to mitigate the risk of introducing change. But the volume is so large for this market, you can just make the commodity level product and still be okay as far as creating jobs and sustaining jobs.
I guess from the perspective of just your distribution system, I want to ask this for a while. how have you been, approaching this the whole, global supply chain shortage crisis from the coronavirus? And what was your initial strategy? Did you mostly collect materials in the US or outside? What networks
Yeah,
you relied on? Uh,
yeah.
what transportation, and versus after coronavirus or during the shortage, how have you adapted your strategy?
It's tough. It's a real challenge. So we would typically have some of the more lower cost material that has a longer lead time because it has to go on the ocean. We would keep inventory of that material. So that helped us for a while, but we blew through that inventory. But it's a real problem right now that we're dealing with, this global shortage and lack of transportation and the cost of transportation going high. So it's been very difficult to get the material in, and when we do get it in, the prices are much higher. So how have we dealt with it? We've had to increase the pricing on our customers because the raw material cost has gone up. And as far as you cannot speed up the delivery. You cannot just have somebody turn on the switch for a new factory that's local. You just have to sit and wait. It
Mhm.
literally, sometimes we've had to wait for the material. Of course, we're searching for alternate suppliers, but it's a worldwide issue. So that's why the best thing to do, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, is to mitigate that risk, bring the supply chain local. You remove a lot of variables there.
Mhm. Well, also, another thing we wanted to ask you is about the whole grid versus non-grid perspective, because
Mhm.
many install, depending on who we talk to, installers in different areas favored either grid solution or completely, non-grid autonomous systems, right? And
Mhm.
in some areas, of course, in DC, I mean, we were told that if you're doing it off grid, just doesn't make sense at all. Just because of how high the incentives are for the sort of customer and how payable it would be if it were with these incentives and connected to the grid. And then
Right.
there's states like Minnesota, for example. For example, in our interview with the Solar Museum, that
Mhm.
states would have no incentives and some states and are basically ripping people off. Like you sell to the grid like at a tenth of the price you buy from the grid, and that way
Right.
it even makes sense, to get yourself a battery and keep the system
Right.
right. And in that sense, how are you only focused on solar panels or battery systems as well? How does that play out? And would your, I guess, manufacturing techniques or just technology you use depend on a grid system versus non-grid system? And how would that
Okay.
play out?
Yeah. Well, the solar panels are agnostic to grid, non-grid. Doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
We are beginning to play in this storage space of the battery. So as far as does it is one better than the other? It all depends on the situation. It all depends on the local rules and regulations, perhaps incentives, and also the stability of the local grid and how important for a particular customer it is to have 24/7 power supply. So there are many different factors that will go into that decision. Without a doubt, to go off grid, probably the pricing is very high today, but that is going to come down. Just like the solar panel price was high, and inverters were high, and racking systems were high, and those have all come down, and it's at grid parity. The storage is also going to eventually come down, no doubt about it, as the volumes go up. So we will see what happens in the future if everything goes off grid, and then the grid is just a backup. But then how do you on the fly bring that back up in, right? If you just do an off-grid design. But to answer that question, it all depends on the situation, particular application, and the locality. But as far as the solar panel, it doesn't care whether it's being used in a grid or off grid. So we're neutral in that debate. So guys, a couple more questions, and then if we can wrap it up, I'm coming up on another meeting.
We were just
Great.
about
Yeah, we're
to.
about to wrap it up.
Yeah, but
Great.
well, I guess a quick one then about batteries. From because many people have also said that performance, there's only so much you can increase efficiency for solar panels, and then eventually it would be a fraction of the energy of energy capture for a large cost. What about the battery solutions, storage solutions for, of course, off-grid system as opposed to solar panel solutions? Would those be more effective? Because I mean, there's been very trendy, battery materials you use, just different battery types, how you arrange the system, even how it's connected, how you wire it, and that has led to dramatic, often just performance variations. So. Do you see more promise in that, or?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation to be had in that segment of the market on the batteries. Perhaps some standardizations to make sure everything is nice and safe, but a lot of innovation, especially on the user interface for the batteries, the balancing of the loads inside the batteries. And lithium ion is, of course, very, very exciting. It's much more dense, and it can be cycled a lot for many more cycles than lead acid. But that may not be the only form of energy storage, right? It doesn't have to be a battery. It can be other forms of storage. People are playing with hydrogen as a storage.
I mean, water levels, right? Just water level storage. A battery where water goes up.
Many different, exactly. There are many different. So there's definitely room for innovation there, and some good opportunities for the market development.
Yeah. So I guess final question, right? If you were to say, if our, let's say, viewers were to take one important lesson from this whole interview, what would you say to them about the solar market? How for them to to help expand it? And
you broke up there. Can you repeat that last question?
yeah, sure. So from what should the viewers take away from this interview? Like, from your perspective, what is the solution
most important
to expanding, the solar market and making it US produced, sustainable and local, most important?
Okay. I would say be mindful of the risks of losing solar manufacturing and the solar supply chain manufacturing to outside of the US. Be mindful of the risk that is to our future, and encourage our elected officials to put in the appropriate policies that provide the financial incentives to bring that production back to the US. We are in a capitalist society, so it's not going to happen just because it's a risk. It's not going to happen because people want to create American manufacturing jobs and they feel happy about it, or even going green. It's not going to happen just because, it's good for the environment. You're going to need government policies that provide the appropriate financial incentives for the businesses to say, yep, it makes sense. My investors will be happy to manufacture back in the US. But at first, it takes us to understand the risks if we don't take any action.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great interview.
That was great. We're very thrilled to talk to you. And I mean, if you want, we hope to continue the conversation later. I mean, and yeah, for now, I mean, we'll be in the area today, tomorrow in Los Angeles later. And then, I mean, we could even talk when we're in DC. So
Great.
If anything,
Don't hesitate.
Yeah, feel free to follow us. And I think I provided the info at sun.sustainability on Instagram. and
Okay.
sustainability vlogs, it's called, on YouTube. We have a bunch of these interviews, and I mean, on Instagram, we're constantly doing trip updates for what we did, etc. Some
Right.
cool drone footage, of the Ivanpah solar farm in Nevada. So if you want to check that out. And on
Right.
YouTube, we'll eventually, when we come back, we'll make it into full sets of videos. We'll edit it all together.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good. Good job, guys. Keep it up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.